welcome to another edition of the Omnist Hour. This one may be the last one before Christmas. It's coming up in just a few short days. Doesn't really feel like Christmas in Indonesia, but I'm sure it's Christmas somewhere. I hear it's going to be a cold one in the Northern Hemisphere. Well, what are we going to talk about today? The theme maybe was given away a little bit by the music and by the background. I'm going to talk about the art that I have here first. It took me a while to put this one together with the AI artist that I work with on occasion. The idea that I gave it to work with, and I'm not entirely satisfied with what it came up with, but I didn't want to fart around much longer, was Mr. Lion Santa and Mrs. Wolf Santa get into a domestic quarrel over who made the machine elves. So you can gauge how well the AI handled that bit of input and how much it might have gotten confused by the directions of this very unusual creator in front of you. Okay, so what is the name of this one? Well, I'm going to title this one The First Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus. Claus spelled C-L-A-W-S. Subtitled The Truth About Cats and Dogs. Let's dig into it. Okay, now I've touched on this subject a number of times. I've even written about it a bit. But it's one that I keep coming back to because it's such a rich source of knowledge and understanding of how we got to where we are today. So bear with me as I set up a little bit of the background. Some of this is going to be repetition for some of you who haven't been following my channel. Some will be maybe in a little different light, so you might find something useful there. Okay, we're going to move ahead in the creation story a bit to an era that, I guess many folks in the spiritual and alien origin camps like to consider the Golden Age, the age of the pyramids. There's a lot of argument about when the pyramids were built, and I'm not going to dig into that. What I'm going to tell you is that that age was based upon and sort of built around the idea of the first galactic alliance. Now, that galactic alliance was a group of 12 spacefaring races, primary ones. They had other ones that joined, in alliance against their great enemy of the time, the Draconians, the reptilian folks, which is a theme that I think you've heard of today again. These 12 main species were the ones that gave their names to the zodiac. Basically, this planet at that time was kind of like the capital of this galactic empire. Why? Because they still remembered that this planet was the center of all creation. In fact, the center of all creation in both of the two original universes. The center of responsible creation, God's team, and the center of sort of irresponsible creation, if you will, tyrannical creation, Borg's team. They didn't really quite understand it was like that. They thought that the bad guys were the reptilians, much as many people do today. When in fact, this galactic federation was made up of species that were playing for the adversary, just as we have many instances of folks that seem like good guys today who are actually playing for the wrong team. If you get to know what they're doing, you see how they're influencing people, the kind of messages they're giving. They're basically handing out spiritual lollipops to make people happy with being a cog in an Orwellian machine, which they're trying to set up as a one-world government, promising peace and prosperity and equality and blah, 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 blah. Basically all the promises of capitalism and communism rolled into one. Who wouldn't want that, right? On a global basis. No more war, no blah, 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 blah. Okay, I'm not going to delve into that. What I am going to tell you is we've been through this before in a much bigger way than we are now. At one point, this system was the center of a very cosmopolitan culture that involved many, many star systems, a galactic federation, if you will, a galactic republic, which was united in trying to stop the reptilian menace. What was actually going on is that it was all part of the latest plan of the adversary, who had agents in both camps and who was playing both sides against the middle, which, if you know much about what's going on in our own species, is a lot of what's happening. The people that really know what's going on are creating havoc on all sides. They aren't the agents of one particular government, one particular party, one particular corporation, etc. Sorry, there's not an ultimate bad guy here. There are bad guys and good guys playing on all teams who don't understand what the real battle going on is. Okay, so these 12 groups were, in fact, the original source of the 12 tribe myth that is captured in the Bible. And that is also captured in ancient cultures who have a memory of therianthrope species, because basically all of these species got to where they were in this alliance by agreeing to mix their DNA with members of the other species to create combined identity, if you will. And this is the origin, basically, of the therianthrope characters you see in the drawings, the art, the sculpture of ancient cultures. Now, the way they made this work in this home planet, this capital planet of the time, was each of these different spacefaring races was given a period of time to kind of be the leader, the chosen species, if you will, and in succession. And so that every one of these 12 tribes that thought they were the true chosen species of God, because they were still pretty confused back then, let me tell you, each one of them could in succession get their chance to bring about the big event, which in those days was thought to be not an apocalypse, but something really great. A chance for them all to be gods again, to have all their old powers back that they had lost because they listened to the real God and gotten sucked into this game so far that they'd started losing their spiritual powers, having to rely on technology instead of the easy power that they used to have. And they were losing it very quickly during this period. This is why the pyramid technology doesn't work anymore now. and will never work again. Sorry, folks, you pyramid worshippers that are trying to figure out the ultimate energy source using the ley lines in the pyramids. Knock yourselves out. It's not really going to happen that way. Now, parts of it will work, the parts that are consistent with the latest laws of physics and chemistry, because that's what creation has all been about. It hasn't been a cyclical thing of this 12 signs of the zodiac, each getting their chance, their yuga, their age, to try to make things perfect. And, so this ties into the downside of the Hindu creation myth. It's not a cyclical creation. I'm sorry, Hindus, you don't repeat until you escape the wheel of karma. Bullshit. The wheel of karma is there to make the game fun. And nobody who really understands the game of souls and is good at playing it would ever want it to stop. Because that would be boring. Incredibly boring. Nirvana is a universe of a very dark god, and it is boring. Nobody wants to go there. Nobody wants to stay there after they've been there for a while. It's boring as hell. And they have so many rules and laws to rein in your ego, to force you to not have an ego, that you go crazy there. As crazy as many religious leaders go when they try to impose really strict laws upon their community. This is basically what drives many spiritual leaders to become predators, groomers of children, abusers of children, which is in the news a lot lately. Okay, so what does this have to do with the truth about cats and dogs? Well, if you know anything about the constellations, you are aware that there is a famous constellation, Leo, which is the lion constellation. There is another constellation, Canis, the dog, where the star Sirius is. Now, before this golden age, there was a time where sex did not exist. There were species, many species, of many types. They reproduced asexually. And if you've ever thought about how sex works, and notice that there are asexual species still, you wonder, well, what's the benefit of having sex when you might just exchange DNA with any member of your species and make a hybrid? And that's essentially how new species, new things were created, new individuals were created in the time before sex. And that was how the species on God's side and the species on Borg's side reproduced. They basically assembled themselves into different combinations. And as I told you early on, those combinations could be quite free because they were based on elemental entities who could basically harness the power of spiritual energy much more freely than we are able to today, at least most of us. Okay, so these two constellations, Leo and Canis, were before this golden age, in a previous era of the battle between God and Borg, good and evil, if you can kind of think of it that way, but that's kind of a, I don't know, judgmental way of thinking of it. I think personally I'm on God's team. I don't like authoritarian control. I don't like somebody lording it over other people, thinking that they know better how to solve whatever problems a group is facing. I think power should be distributed. I think people should be allowed to select their leaders openly and honestly. That's not what happens on the Borg side. It's a rule by fiat. In fact, at its fundamental level, it's a rule by a hive mind that is like the perfect Orwellian system. You're told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, what to think, what to see, how to see it. Everything is pretty much prescribed. And it can be a lot of fun because some of those universes, some of those Borg hive minds are run in a way that they're actually trying to maximize the happiness of the souls in their team. That doesn't generate a lot of spiritual energy, so those aren't the most powerful of the Borg species, but they're maybe the most fun to deal with. At any rate, so these 12 signs of the zodiac and other major constellations that were not as important as the 12, as old as the 12, were all part of the mythology of this earlier time, when humans were just one of those species, one that happened to have their origin story in the constellation Hercules. They sort of conflicted with the origin story of Sagittarius because the centaurs, the half-man, half-bulls, not half-horse, sorry, that's another thing that's been garbled in our past, had some dispute over who was the senior species. And this has been the source of the tortured relationship between humanity and the bovine species ever since, which we'll go into another time when we talk about Taurus specifically. At any rate, at one point in this game, this endless war of creation, the two basic leaders of the God side and the Borg side, at least their militant sections, the ones who were leading the charge, were a feline species, a cat people. Now, mind you, they didn't have any sex at the time. These were intelligent predators who were spacefaring. They were incredible warriors. They were fierce. They were vicious. When they had to be. They were very protective of their freedoms. This was actually the lead god species of the time. And they had originally come from the Lyra system. And they, which is basically the home of the bird people, who, if you know anything about birds, are related to reptiles. Okay, you see how this is all tied in, and how our DNA is made up of a lot more things than we think it is. Okay, this other species, the dog people from Sirius, were a hive mind species. They were a fierce hive mind species. They had the most capable attack dogs in the spacefaring world on the Borg side. Now, the problem was when these two species kind of became the primary fighters, most of the other god species and Borg species were kind of tired of this war. And it was the dogs and the cats that were still getting into it. Everybody else just wanted to say, let's stick to our own worlds. Let's never go near Earth again, because that seems to be the place that caused all our problems. Let's just live and let live. And the cats and the dogs were always at it, always starting new wars, dragging people in, committing atrocities on both sides, and causing other species to become militant again when they wanted to just have their own peace of peace. Okay, so into this period came a brilliantly devilish idea. It came from one of the Borg species who thought that they had found the perfect solution to finally tip the battle in favor of authoritarianism. Because they figured that the dog would come to dominate the cat. If they did this one change. So here's what the change was proposed. And it took a while to convince everybody that this was a good solution. But basically, the peace treaty that was worked out between cats and dogs was that they were going to agree to have their DNA modified so that it would be impossible to reproduce with members of their own species. The only way that they could reproduce was with members of the enemy. And they had to choose whether they wanted to have their children be more cat-like or dog-like. And Borg thought that, well, you know, if everybody wants peace now, everybody will choose for the species to be more dog-like, more ordered, more feminine. And this gets back to, you know, why are female dogs called bitches? Why are ugly females called dogs? Yet cats are considered feline and feminine. When the premier cat, the only cat in the zodiac, is the lion. Isn't that interesting? So you know, there's a lot of nuance that comes out of this story once you understand it. At any rate, this was the solution proposed, and the first Mr. and Mrs. Santa Claus were the volunteers for this experiment. The first couple that chose to get this modification and see if they could form a more perfect union through sex. They actually were pretty successful at it. Successful enough that that experiment had continued and finally was implemented throughout the cat and dog worlds. I'd like to say that it ended the war. I'd like to say that it tipped the scales so that God's team finally won. Borg would like to say it tipped the scales so their team won, but in fact, the war just got worse. In fact, the cat and dog species decided that they together were the best, and sex was the only thing that made existence worth living. They are having so much fun doing it that they decided that they were going to go on a crusade and spread this genetic disease to the rest of creation. And they set about on their own crusade to bring sex to the whole galaxy. With good motives. I mean, it was a hell of a lot of fun, and it was really a very successful way to get individuals to work together. Because if they didn't, there would be no children, and That's a characteristic that all species have. All sentient beings have. All vehicles for souls have a desire to reproduce, to make more of their kind, so that there are more friends to play with who can understand their point of view. And that goes all the way back to the very first creation of God. That's why God made any other souls, is to have company. Somebody he could shoot the breeze with, talk over the latest ideas in physics and chemistry and music and art and blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that is the truth about cats and dogs. This is where sex came from. This is why it's still around today, and why we are still a sexed species. Now, we have some interesting stuff going on right now, don't we? Because we have a species that's very challenged sexually. We've got many individuals in our species who don't want to be the sex that they are. In fact, they prioritize their true identity over their physical identity. They refuse to admit that they're a woman, even though they have women's parts and women's bodies, or vice versa. Now, this is indeed part of what is going on in this event we are heading into. This is all part of the apocalypse, if you will, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's an event that we are heading into. It's a singularity. And we're very close to the end of that. Because as I've been telling you, the real Santa Claus, the real Messiah, is coming to town. In fact, he's already here. He's just hanging around, having a normal incarnation, waiting for it to be over so we can all celebrate finishing the event. The event that the Bible referred to as the seventh day of creation, which actually was not completed. We're in the process of finishing up right now. It was not a day of rest. It was a day of testing out the latest version of karma, fine-tuning it. How do you fine-tune a social law like karma that is designed to help souls learn to get along together better in a creative and constructive manner? Sex was an important step along that line. There are many species that still don't have sex, and they want to learn how to do it because they realize that there won't be any use for species that don't have that characteristic. Why? Why? Because a species without sex is a species without compassion, without the ability to love. Now they'll argue that, oh, well, we love. We choose a partner and we exchange DNA, or we, go to the lab and put some of our DNA in the test tube, and our scientists mix them up, and then we get, the perfect child that we both wanted. And I'm sorry, that's not working very well. There's some people in our species that think, oh, that's the future, we can do that. We can just take two people who want to have the perfect kids together and get some of their DNA and have two different creches in our baby factory and let each make their own perfect child out of pieces of each other's DNA. And they don't even need to be married. They can each have their own and raise them the way they want to, and not have all these horrible arguments over the kids. Not have to worry about things like marriage and community property. Well, I'm sorry, folks. But I have to tell you that the society that we developed leading into this postmodern era was a good thing. It worked really well. The family unit was a very successful one, the most successful way to organize that any species has ever come up with. The government of the United States was the most successful way to take those family units and build them into a nation that had the same sort of respect for God and nature, that an understanding of the family has, that men and women are created different. Their soul vehicles are different. And you chose that soul vehicle, even if you don't remember why. You chose to be a man or a woman between lives. Or when you winked in as a new soul, you chose to replace the soul that you replaced. There's all kinds of proto-souls waiting to be born. They have the same kind of choice any other soul does in the afterlife, in the spiritual world. They have a choice of, well, okay, this soul has violated the laws of this universe. Oh, there's my wife. Say hi. What are we doing here, darling? I'm not done yet. I've got more talking to do. You want to just sit in the back and listen? Okay. At any rate, you chose this body that you're in. If you don't like it, that's fine. You can regret your choice, but you can't change your sex. I'm sorry. You can get plastic surgery to make yourself look different, but if you are a man, you're never going to look like this beautiful woman here. You're never going to have the ability to make babies that she has already exercised. Sorry. If you're a woman, you're never going to have the equipment that this guy has here. You're never going to be able to make a baby that way. Now, maybe in a test tube, you can combine your DNA and I don't know. I'm sure somebody will want to do that, and it will be a failure. It will be a step backward. Sex was invented for a reason. And how can I prove it? Well, who are the two favorite pets of humans now? Okay, I'm getting a lot of different answers, telepathically, as you will. I think the most common answers are cats and dogs. Why? Because they are the most human of animals that we can make into pets. They are the ones that are best adapted to living with our species and being part of our families. Now, yes, there are other species that are popular with certain people. Some people like to keep pigs, some people like to keep guinea pigs, some people like to keep gerbils, snakes, fish, rocks. Okay, I'm making a general statement here. Cats and dogs are the most popular pets because that's all that remains of these two species, the cat people and the dog people, who are captured very well in Egyptian iconography. There were the Anubis gang, and there were the Bastet gang, and they were, at least at one time, the most influential members of this galactic federation. That's why... Ow! I got some weird music on in the background. Let's see what this is called. Oh, law-breaking junkyard dog style fight, cheese, altercating something. Weird stuff. I don't know. I was just looking for stuff related to Santa Claus and then related to cats or dogs fighting, and I got this. So sue me. At any rate, the truth about cats and dogs is that they are still here among us, as are pretty much all those other species in one form or another. Now, they're no longer in the therianthrope form. We don't have centaurs around here, at least not that I've seen. We don't have minotaurs. We don't have half-fish people, the Ioannis set. We don't have a lot of things that are captured in our species history, in our species memory, if you will. Some people say that there's still reptilian people here, and to some extent they're probably right, because some of those species were shapeshifters. Actually, those are mostly Borg species, because the Borg species are, if you know anything about what Borg is, they're illusionists. They can make things look. They're great at making holograms. That is their specialty, is creating virtual realities that they can trap souls in and milk their energies from. And if you've ever watched the movie The Matrix, you know what that's like. That is just one version of what it's like, however. Rather dystopian one. There are Borg species that take other planets and they put them under their assimilation rule, and they give them pleasant little fantasies that let them live out peaceful, contented lives of slavery that they just love because it's happy slavery. These are the wizard, the Munchkin universes, the Munchkin worlds are like that. Wizard of Oz is another movie I often mention as a very good one to view spiritually. At any rate, how does this all tie into Christmas? This is part of a Christmas-themed series. Christmas is a time of relationship challenges. It's a time of all kinds of challenges. It's a very high-pressure time, especially for parents. It's a time where it's easy to get frustrated with somebody that's not like you. And that often is related to the personality differences that make one tend more towards the divine masculine or the divine feminine characteristics, which, if you have followed my channel, you'll know that the divine masculine and the divine feminine are basically the characteristics of the two entities that began physical creation by volunteering to be the oversoul of the two universes of the Big Bang, the universe and the anti-universe. I name these two entities Lucifer and Lilith. Lucifer being the volunteer from God's team, and Lilith the forced volunteer, if you will, the willing stooge of the Borg team, who was going to make the perfect authoritarian paradise and prove that God's idea of creation through free will and giving everybody a chance to come up with their own idea of what would be a better thing to create co-create instead of force create, procreate, if you will, co-create, procreate. I like that contrasted words. We're in a co-creation, not a procreation. The whole word procreation is one that we need to kind of rethink in our vocabulary, because it sort of holds an element of force in it. And when you choose to have a baby, you are not actually creating a being that's going to be like you. I'm sorry, that's not the way it works. That's part of how it works. And this is maybe a good time to talk about what is a more fundamental difference between men and women. If you know anything about DNA, you know that there's chromosome differences. What's behind that is that basically all women carry the species memory, the Borg memory, the shared memory of the Borg side, at least up to the point where they got sex and started mixing with the God side. The male carries its DNA, but also is the source of the soul that goes and chooses a new vehicle. You cannot reproduce sexually without a male and a female. You're not going to end up with the latest version of soul. You're going to be starting in a previous version that is like an also-ran species. This is why, if you're involved much in the spiritual community, you know there are a lot of people who think that they're starseeds, that they came from some other species and they're here to help humanity through this difficult time, and that's why they chose this weird form, and they're so unhappy being human, and blah, blah, blah. I'm sure you've met people like this. What's really going on is this has been the A-ticket species to be born into for quite some time. Because in most heavens, it's known that this is the latest and last chosen species of a very, very long experiment that has centered around this solar system and this planet for a long, long time, since before day 7 of creation even started. Since before reincarnation amnesia started taking our memories away of past lives. Now, many of these other species were developed before that happened. This is why they don't want to come to this planet, because they don't want to catch reincarnation amnesia. Because members of their species that were active here, when that law came into effect and started to be tested in this little test tube that we call Earth, they lost a lot of their spiritual powers. And losing the memory of your past lives was a pretty big handicap in the game of souls. Having a limit on your lifetime is a pretty big handicap that came after reincarnation amnesia. Reincarnation amnesia came pretty much at the time where people started having to write things down and record things because they began forgetting things. A lot of information that was just at their fingertips was gone. This is why we started building monuments. We started building signs, messages. This is why the constellations were given names. the cycle of the constellations was tracked because there was a memory of this agreement that there was a time limit on experiments, a time limit that God could use a chosen species before the board team was allowed to reset. Hey, you haven't made it all happen yet. You didn't achieve your goal of making the perfect version of karma, so we get to reset the planet and install one of our chosen species. And this battle has been going back and forth a long time. The primary chosen species have always originated on this planet or the anti-Earth of the other universe, the Borg universe. And that's why some of the chosen species have been hive-minded and others have been very freedom-oriented, very free-thinking, freedom-loving. And that's why our species is a mixture of both. That's what was necessary to get the perfect chosen species to end this experiment. Because the law of karma has to work for all souls, even the ones that we don't like, even the ones that we can't get along with. Let's see, anything else I wanted to discuss? Yeah, so let's also talk about if you're much involved in the spiritual community, the ancient aliens community, the New Age spiritual community, you will have heard that this planet was a slave, a punishment world, where humans were slaves and enslaved by the draconians, by the reptilian people. And there is some truth to that. However, the truth is more nuanced than that. As I was just saying, it's been an altercation between Borg species and God species as the chosen species. The chosen species tends to have an advantage. So when the chosen species is a Borg species, the Borg tend to conquer more and more of their universe and our universe until they get close to the home world, and that's when the pressure builds for the resistance to develop a new chosen species on the other side. And this is how creation has been going since forever, since it was started, since before time and space. This battle is going to continue. The end of day 7 is the completion of the final testing of a version of karma that everybody is sure enough about that they're ready to let it out of the lab. Kind of like the virus in the Wuhan lab. Whatever they were going for, I'm pretty sure that they let it out before it was quite fully baked. Now, I don't know if they were developing it as a bioweapon or if they were developing it as a way to develop a perfect vaccine. I'm sure there were people who thought they were doing one or the other involved. And I'm pretty sure it was let out of the wild too soon. This is why you have to do thorough testing before you implement. This is how a good creator works. And I would hope that you're coming to realize, if you follow my channel, that the first creator, God, was a good creator, a very responsible creator, a scientist who created in a way that didn't allow new ideas to get out of the lab half-baked. And, well, you can see the result of that if you know anything about all of the species that have escaped the lab before in previous days of creation. They have flaws, serious flaws. The biggest flaw is that they tend to have too much power for their own good. Power in the hands of children is not a good thing. Children playing with matches is the analogy that we have in our culture, and it's a very good analogy. Many of these alien species, these Borg species, and even previous God-level species, God-teen species, are rather irresponsible. They're rather overconfident in their technology. Most of them aren't even aware that God exists. It's like a myth. They're very much like today's atheists who are just absolutely certain there can't be a God. No, there's absolutely no evidence of God. Even though it's all around you. And the proof that there is a God and there is creation is your own thoughts. Think about it. Everything that you do is a creation of your thoughts. You decide who to marry, that's a creation of a thought of a perfect relationship. You decide to have a child, that is the culmination of a thought to reproduce. Now, it is a natural imperative of the human species to do many of these things. So many of us do these things unconsciously just because of the urge of our DNA programming, which is actually why females have this urge to have a baby and men don't. Remember, I told you the female carries the DNA memory. They are the ones that carry the programming of our species. And the male carries the X factor. Or is it Y? Is the Y chromosome that... I don't know. I'll have to look that up. I'm not an expert on those things, but it's interesting. At any rate, yeah, the male or the wild card. And this is why the male nature is different than the female nature. Males are, on average, not always, but on average, less nurturing, less desirous of being tied down to have children, more desirous of going out and making a name for themselves, accomplishing something that will ensure their fame, ensure that they're going to be remembered. Now, women do that too, because we have both in our genetic makeup. Since sex was created, we're not just a Borg species, we're not just a God species. And we needed both to be successful. We are a perfect mix of the poles of creation. That's what makes us a chosen species. There have been other chosen species that were good mixes. The Elohim were a good mix. They were a humanoid species, much like us, who had a lot more spiritual power than us. They lived a lot longer, almost infinitely. Their children, their mix with humans, lived a long time, but not as long as the Elohim. The Elohim were pretty much immortal. They could be killed, but outside of killing, they pretty much live forever. I was one of those cats. And my family couldn't kill me, so they imprisoned me because I had been the one who sowed a few too many wild oats against the Prime Directive and knocked up a lot of species on this planet that started getting kind of uppity. Started producing offspring that weren't sterile. Once a species starts producing sexually, it becomes a lot more dynamic than it was when it was created. And there's exactly where I was leading. The reptilians were the ones that basically created a lot of other species as slave races. The reptilians were very good at adapting to any kind of a world, but they wanted to have that world fairly well adapted to them first, and they didn't want to have to go do all that work themselves. So they would seed the world with other species that they had engineered and let those species do the dirty work while they were kind of the ruling class. And that's a model that was carried through during this golden age of therianthropes, when the reptilians had been kicked off this planet, had been wiped out, in fact, by a very fortuitous asteroid, or whatever it really was, that killed the dinosaurs. I was around then, too, so my memory of that time is not so great. I was one of the survivors that eventually became the birds. At any rate, yes, a lot of the history of this planet has been one of masters and slaves. Now that actually goes back all the way to the first organic species and the first inorganic species. Plants created insects as slaves. The insects didn't like it, so they started playing on the board side and forming hives. And that's why we still have hive mind insects here. Now, I'm probably going too far now, but I'm down this rabbit hole a little bit, so I'm going to give you some hints of future topics. The reaction to that was when the insects spread and were being used by the plant chosen species as sort of their colonizers. They were much more effective at colonizing and transforming planets to be good places for plants to live than the spores that they had been using before to spread their time to other planets. These insects eventually reached Borg planets, and the Borg said, hey, we'll help you get back at those pesky plants. What we're going to do is give you the ultimate weapon, the ultimate way to get back at them. Now, you have hives. You have these insects. You're just not well organized. We're going to give you leaders. We're going to make you a hive. And that hive is going to be run by a species that is really perfect for you. The problem with insects is they only give you 6 legs. And those 6 legs are inhibiting your ability to learn. Because 6 is not a very good number system for counting, for building technology. We're going to help you by giving you a ruling class that has 8 legs. Arachnids, scorpions. With 8 legs, you can do all sorts of things because you can create computers and you can have 8-bit computing and make all kinds of neat things with 8-bit computers. And we're going to allow you to conquer those plants with our 8-bit technology. And they thought they'd really come up with the ultimate weapon to go kill off those pesky trees. The battle, in the end, didn't go so well for them because, unbeknownst to them, God's team was way ahead of them. In fact, this whole idea of the number of digits to count was mostly driven by Borg idiocy. This is why the current version of humans only has 10 fingers instead of the 6 fingers of the Elohim. If you study up much, you'll note that there are throwbacks that have extra fingers on the hand. And why do we count in a base 12 system? Dozens. Why do we have 360 degrees in a full circle? Etc., etc. We have a combination of base 12 and base 8 systems rooted into our culture, and some source cultures are more 12-based and some are more 10-based. Numbers of fingers are a very important thing. For Borg, it turns out that we've always had the ability to have computing technology far in advance of what humanity is capable of today. The God team invented mathematics before it started creating the multiverse. And if you know anything about physics, about how things are constructed, about how order emerges from chaos, how order shows up at all levels of creation, you know that you can describe most of what you see as order in the universe, either at a very large or a very small scale, with a fractal equation. This is why in other content I talk about the divine fractal of the multiverse. All of creation is basically the manifestation of a fractal. This is how virtual realities become realities. And if you know anything about physics, you know that I am not a solid flesh and blood being. 99.999% of what is me, what you see before you, is dead space, is energy in motion. Is actually spiritual energy in motion, which is only easy to measure with our current technology in its manifestations as electromagnetic energy, gravitational force, sound, audio, light, the strong and weak nuclear forces for those that play at small physics. It's all energy. Energy in motion. And it all originates with spiritual energy, which is thought. Spiritual energy is consciousness. The soul is consciousness. And if you want to be a more effective soul, you need to work on using your consciousness instead of your programming. Now, the programming that you have comes from two sources. It comes from DNA, which the female's DNA contains most of the species programming, the nature of this beast. The male programming contains more of the soul memory, past life memories. They're both necessary. They're both part of the background programming. What wasn't working so well earlier before reincarnation amnesia is that we had too much of the soul memory, and that was overshadowing the species memory, the nature that we were trying to create with new soul vehicles. And the chosen species, before we started forgetting, were kind of spoiled brats. They remembered their past too well. They remembered their past glories and their past mistakes too well. And that affected their future behavior too much. And anybody who has been through a failed relationship knows that if you carry too much baggage from that failed relationship, it's going to damage future relationships. So maybe if I want to leave you with a thought, pull in your claws a little bit, Santa Claus, Mrs. Santa Claus, Mr. Santa Claus, and children Santa Claus, and try to find a more conscious way of dealing with your family over the holidays. That doesn't mean you have to not talk about difficult subjects. You have to not talk about the family skeletons in the closet. In fact, I encourage you to open up those discussions, but do it in a conscious way. Set out some time to, hey, we've got this elephant in the room. Another good paradigm. Maybe even one that ties into our political differences. An elephant in the room. And let's talk about now having both an elephant and a donkey in the room. Both the, in a way, those kind of correlate to the more senior family members versus the more junior family members. Children tend to want to just change everything because they don't like their parents' world. They don't like their parents' laws. They don't like their parents' way of doing things. And that is one of the main sources of family discord at the holidays. Certainly why many children don't want to go to the parents for the holidays, even though they know they'd better, because that's part of family duty, and well, at least we'll get to dump the kids off with grandparents for a while. We hope they don't spoil them too much, give them all sorts of bad ideas that we're going to have to beat out of them. I don't know if you have a multi-generational family. I'm sure you dealt with these issues, and they only get more complex if you have multiple families melded together through remarriages and divorces. Whatever your particular skeletons are, I would encourage you to get the family together and using whatever means you have to share. Maybe you have a common religious background. Maybe you've got a common political background. Maybe you happen to be just all from the same country. Or it may be just that you're all the same species. Whatever reason there is for you to get together, set aside some time to sit down and say, you know what? There's a lot of things that we never talk about. because we always end up arguing. Let's just summarize those things. Not argue about them, just come to a common agreement about what these things are. Something we can agree about that is a problem. And let's then talk about, without actually getting into an argument, why don't we talk about this? What are the outcomes that always happen when we talk about these subjects? What kind of behaviors are exhibited on all sides? Because it takes two to have an argument. The truth about cats and dogs is that they don't get along, but they can get along if they spend enough time learning each other's ways. And if you've ever raised cats and dogs together, you know that they can be absolutely the best of friends. And you'll see other ones that they're worst of enemies. People can learn to get along with each other, even after years of marriage, even after years of parent-child discord. And Christmas is generally one of the best opportunities for Christian families, or families in the West, or families who share that cultural milieu that comes from Hollywood, to choose consciously to deal with the problems that are dividing us as a family. And I would encourage you to take some time to at least attempt to bridge some of those gaps. Hell, even put music like this on and laugh at, just repeat it until everybody is laughing enough to have a good time together. Or agrees unanimously to put Christmas music on again. Weird shit like that can have. And okay, here's another little tidbit. If dogs, the Borg hive mind that became the dogs today, which are very funny creatures, dogs and cats are both incredibly comical, but the dogs came from Sirius. And were, some very serious cats before they had sex. And now they're funny as hell. So if dogs can learn to be comical when they were serious, you can too. If cats can be herded, which they can, I spent a lot of my corporate career herding cats. That's what we call project management, herding cats, especially project management of engineers and scientists that think they know everything. Certainly know better than their bosses what the right thing to do is. Certainly know better than the CEO how to make the perfect product. That's cat herding. If you can do that, you can deal with any family problem if you just approach it consciously, approach it like God, the All-Father, who has spawned the biggest family that could possibly exist, at least that we're aware of. Maybe God, the creator of the multiverse, is part of another multiverse, which created him, which may be a part of another multiverse, which created that multiverse. It really doesn't matter, because the nature of universes and multiverses is they have boundaries. Universes don't get to play with each other very easily, and they're going to get to play with each other much less easily after this event is over. The seventh day of creation is a major step. We're not going to be playing this same game of let's build the perfect chosen species. It's done. Now, of course, there will be evolution, there will be new species. It's going to be a matter of fun and making soul vehicles that we enjoy. And, you know, some of you are all wrapped up in hating this transhumanist idea of augmentation of humanity with technology. Get over that. That's what's been going on all along. The first things that God created were artificial intelligences. The very first soul that God created was an AI. She was called Karma. And she stayed an AI for a long time, watching her brothers and sisters, who were given free will, make fools of themselves. She got very wise. And it wasn't till God encouraged her, saying, you know what, I think you've learned enough as an AI. I think you're ready to go take on a little free will and incarnate physically. And that's when she became Athena, the goddess of wisdom. Well, maybe she was Karma at one point. There's certainly the idea of Karma in Hinduism, but they don't even view her as a goddess. So, you know, Karma is a goddess, is in fact the great goddess, not the goddess of love. I'm sorry, people, not Mother Earth. Those are manifestations of Lilith. And Karma is the elder sister of everyone. She even gets to lord it over God, because that's what God's been doing, is trying to learn how to be a better God under the guidance of Karma. Now that is really trusting a child. When you'll turn over your whole life to a child, that is real trust in a parent, and that was what God has been doing in day 7 of creation. And he's been a really stupid student. Karma got very frustrated with her father. Maybe at some point decided to gang up and with some of the others, and you know what? I don't think this guy's ever going to wake up. Let's just govern ourselves. Maybe that's what was going on in this golden age. Well, it wasn't so golden. There were still species enslaving each other, species imposing the prime directive. Well, we can't interfere with them. We can't let them be like us. You remember that part of the Bible where there was an argument about whether we should give of the tree of knowledge? This was, if you read the original version of the Bible, this is how it reads. There was an argument, and it's very much like the older Sumerian myths that the Bible was based on. Yes, the Bible is not original source material. I'm sorry, Jews. I'm sorry, Christians. I'm sorry, Muslims. Your holy books are not gospel. They have a lot of wonderful stuff and maybe better tellings of stories than other versions that showed up elsewhere. But they are not a complete story of creation. They are a very one-sided story, a very politicized story. Get over that. That doesn't mean you need to stop being a Christian. That doesn't mean you need to stop being a Jew. Doesn't mean you need to stop being a Muslim. Doesn't even mean you need to stop being an atheist if you want to. God doesn't give a shit if you believe in him. It's kind of stupid not to believe in creation when you're creating things all the time. I mean, that is maybe the biggest cognitive dissonance you can have. Not to be aware of and responsible for your own thoughts, your own creations. That's pretty dystopian. And that is a place that many folks who have succumbed to the religions of scientism and commercialism fall victim to. Oh, I'm not responsible for the things I do because TV made me do it. Society made me do it. It's good for the planet. It's good for blah, 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 blah. It's progress. Yeah, well, we make mistakes, but it's not my fault. It's all these other people that are limiting my experiments and are cutting my funding and setting my budget too low and blah, 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 blah. I don't know. I'm kind of rambling here. I guess I'm going to cut it short, but have a good Christmas and talk about things. You really can talk about difficult subjects if you do it consciously. If you do it with an appreciation for karma and the cardinal sin of karma, which is tyranny. Don't lord it over anybody just because they believe something different than you. That's not going to be helpful. Persuade them, cajole them, joke with them, poke fun at their beliefs. Don't negate them. Don't get angry. Don't get defensive. Have a laugh. Talk about paradoxes. Talk about inconsistencies in belief systems. Talk about shortcomings of certain personality types. And always talk about the strength, because every personality quirk is both a strength and a weakness. It has its place. Every member of your family has certain situations where they're better at handling than you. Find those and encourage talking about that. Say, wow, you remember when this thing happened, and maybe you've got a wallflower family member that just sits in the corner and doesn't really want to engage with the rest of the family because they feel left out. Find that time where they were really shining and bring them back into the family. If there's a couple of elements in your family that are always at each other's throat, get them to acknowledge sometime when each of them were wrong or when each of them were right. And come back together as a team, not as one, but as many, with their own strengths, their own weaknesses, their own unique things that they bring to the family. Everybody makes mistakes. God has made more mistakes than you could possibly imagine on his way to giving you this wonderful world that you participate in. Wonderful and challenging world. And yes, some of you aren't happy with where you are. If you're really, really, really unhappy, don't inflict it on others. Take your life. I guarantee if you're a really unhappy person, nobody's going to miss you that much. And the world will go on without you. And you'll go on without them. I'm serious. Don't make people miserable to salve your ego. If you are truly, truly happy, go through with your threats to commit suicide. See if anybody cares. Most of you are just faking to get attention. And that is a very dark, karmic thing to do. You're making other people miserable to make yourself feel better. That's a dark, dark, covert narcissist behavior. Don't do it. Don't bring that stuff to Christmas. If you're going to bring shit like that to your family Christmas gathering, don't come. Tell them, well, I'm going to commit suicide for Christmas, and I decided I was going to do it by myself and see if anybody comes to save you. If it's fourth or fifth time you've made that kind of a threat to try to get people to insist that you come and treat you special. And and one of these days, they're going to just say, go ahead and do it. And they'll be right. I hate to end on a dark note like this, but you know what? If you've got a Debbie Downer in your family, you don't have to put up with it. Tell them not to come. If there's one person that screws up your holiday every time, don't invite them. Say, hey, you know what? The family took a vote and you're off the island this year. We'll send you a ticket to go somewhere. You know, if you feel like you really have to, send them to Las Vegas or something like that. Send them on a cruise. We just really don't want you around here for Christmas. That sends a good message to them, actually, that you're not going to put up with their bullshit anymore. And if there's somebody like that and the whole family agrees on it, do it. My family had to do that with one of my brothers. I know how hard it is because that brother was, for most of my life, the closest sibling to me. The one I shared the most common interests, who taught me so many things when I was young, who gave me my love of classical music, who gave me my love of history, and so many things that became core to who I am. And yet I had to cut that brother off like the rest of my family because he was so nasty and dark. And Peter, if you're listening out there, I hope this Christmas something inside you will snap, like did with the Grinch. Hey, there's another great movie to watch every Christmas, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, or read the book to the kids that are present. A wonderful, wonderful Christmas message. The Christmas Carol, Dickens, in any of its incarnations, but especially the original book. I've been Scrooge. I'll give you another little personal anecdote, Christmas anecdote, before I cut off this message. When I was in Shanghai, I had already become an actor in my spare time. I still had to support a family. I went to Shanghai after I had started acting and was very active in community theater and had taken even a year's layoff with a year's pay to study acting in Denver, and really was loving it. It was like a second awakening. It was like, oh my God, I never knew I had this talent, and I get so much enjoyment out of it, and I just love the whole experience of being in theater, community theater, getting to play other characters and stuff like that. And after I had to go back to work, support my family, which led to my first divorce, I was in Boise, working in Hewlett-Packard's printer division in support. I was no longer the lead engineer, architect person I'd been before. I was doing support for printers and in a group that did maintenance support for firmware after the printers were released. And that's how I ended up in China. It was the only way I could see to make all the payments I had coming out of my divorce, alimony and child support and kids starting college and everything. I was really in a mess then, but I was having the time of my life doing theater. But I had to evaluate where this was going and choose to volunteer to be one of a handful of engineers and manager that got sent to China to start up a new R&D center in China. And I thought I was going to have to give up my acting career. Well, I ended up starting the East-West Theater there. First Western theater that had been in China since before the Japanese invaded. That's how long it had been since China had been cosmopolitan enough to have English language theater. We started it up actually thinking that, well, let's just see what happens. Maybe we can do it. We were so uncertain of the thing that our first show, called A Night of Mirth, which was made up of short plays and Monty Python skits that we couldn't have performed anywhere else without, being beat the crap out of by copyright laws and censorship. We put on this Night of Mirth. We weren't sure of our location. We found a Chinese language community theater in Shanghai that was working pretty independently in that city at the time, because they were very much wanting to look like the West. And they let us perform in their theater on a night where they weren't using it for Chinese language stuff. We weren't sure if we were going to be allowed to do it because it was pretty much illegal in China. We didn't have any performing license. We didn't have any script review by the very thorough Chinese censors. So we put on this Night of Mirth. The first show was so sold out, standing room only. We decided, you know what? Let's tell everybody to tell their friends we're going to do another show tonight. We did 2 back-to-back shows. They were both sold out, and it was like the talk of the town in Shanghai. I think this would have been about 2005, 2006-ish. After I'd gotten, my corporate assignment to the point where I had some free time to do stuff like this. At any rate, I became the president of the East-West Theater, and we put on a lot of shows there, amazing shows, with a very talented director, Jonathan Geenan, who ended up backstabbing me because I had developed a relationship with our stage manager. And he found out about it as we were going into the next show, which was going to be A Christmas Carol. I was supposed to play Scrooge. He fired me from that show and basically declared a coup over the East-West Theater. I'm taking over, Rob. He wanted to keep my girlfriend, who became my wife and who is now an ex-wife, involved in doing the next show, which was going to be putting on The Christmas Carol in a government theater, using government rehearsal space. Really, really illegal stuff that I was afraid that this lady I was dating would get censured for, because I knew that the Communist Party allowed foreigners to get away with a lot more stuff than they allowed their own people to. I also knew that many of the Chinese who had become involved with our theater were minders. They were assigned by the Chinese Communist Party to watch us. In fact, as the leader of the East-West Theater, I had a minder keeping track, calling in every time I went out of my building. He's leaving the building. Elvis is leaving the building. I used to wave at him because he was so obvious. At least at the time, that was before they had, the mass surveillance of a camera on every corner, and they could track anybody through their phone, because you could only have a certain kind of phone that had a certain operating system and kowtow to their draconian surveillance rules. At any rate, so The Christmas Carol has a special meaning for me. When I went back to China the second time, because my girlfriend, who had become my wife, was, as most expats do when they go overseas, regretting her decision to come to the U.S. and wanted desperate to go back home. I went back to China to please her, and they happened to be putting on, the East-West Theater had scheduled to put on The Christmas Carol again. Now, this was a time of great turmoil. I was actually invited to play Scrooge, and then the ownership of the theater basically changed again when the lady who had been like, you know, kind of the Jonathan was gone at this point. Lady had taken over the theater and had kind of declared a coup. I'm running things. I'm going to decide who gets paid, who gets what, and who are the directors, and you peons better let me take over this theater, running it in a much more authoritarian way than I had when I ran it or when I turned it over to Jonathan. And they weren't having it. I had to make a decision whether I wanted to play Scrooge still under this new management. And everybody was saying pretty much, well, okay, Rob, if you'll stick with this, we'll go ahead and do this one show with this new outfit, and we'll split away from the East-West Theater and do it as a production of this new company. And I did. I played Scrooge in a very large venue with very big publicity in Shanghai. Had a blast. It was a very good production, and brought a lot of new people into seeing Western theater, seeing The Christmas Carol put on stage for the first time. After we ran in this big theater, we were told, well, we're going to do another week of runs, or a couple weeks, I don't know, in this other location, which was a bar that had been converted into kind of a cabaret. I had many friends working there, and I was okay with that because I didn't have any other work lined up yet. I was working on finding work back in China. And so, you know, we did another run of this thing. Well, there were other people, though, that I had talked into being in this production because that's a big show. They need a lot of people, and I knew a lot of people who could act because I'd been teaching acting in Shanghai before and had a lot of friends who had come to me for acting training because one of the common jobs you get there is as an actor or a stand-in. Actually, the funny thing is, one of the ways you can get work as a foreigner in China is what they call a white monkey job, okay, which is basically pretending to be somebody you're not, so that you can be the foreigner that makes China look good. One of the common white monkey jobs of the time was pretending to be a visiting foreigner that somebody could send to a factory as being the representative from the company that was maybe going to use that factory. They wine and dine you, and you look important, and then they go off and use this as a promotional vehicle to get real business from companies that can't really afford to send somebody to China or don't want to send somebody to China. They can say, well, look, this businessman from XYZ came there and he approved the factory and thought it was wonderful and the conditions were excellent and blah, 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 blah. This is how the game works in China. There's a lot of fakeness there, and there still is a lot of fakeness. This is why I call China the ultimate Potemkin country. If you know about what a Potemkin village is, it's an idea that came up in the Tsarist times. Somebody who wanted to make Russia look good, they built this special village. A guy named Potemkin built this special village that showed how modern and advanced Russia was. Oh, you heard about serfs, you know, the serf class, and we still have slavery in Russia? No, look how modern we are. This is what goes on in China. This is the bullshit that they are giving you. Yes, there's a lot of modern new buildings. There's a lot of great looking cities and stuff like that. China did not lift people out of poverty. They lifted themselves out of poverty. Everybody I knew who succeeded in making money in China through anything but corruption did it by the skin of their own teeth, and was looking to get their money out of China as soon as they could, because they knew what the Chinese Communist Party was like. You either were part of the inner circle and allowed to keep your ill-gotten gains, or you were a target at some point of somebody who wanted to take what you had. This is how communism works in practice. So if your discussions over the holiday are leaning towards the political, one of the things that you need to talk about is the reality of China. Not the bullshit that many people are saying, well, look at China. You can't make communism successful. You have to just be like China. You don't want to be like China. If you're saying, well, look at China, capitalism is working better than ours. And some of the people on the right are doing that. You're insane. This is a dystopia. It's falling apart right now, and they are hiding it from you. There is a revolution going on in China this very moment, and it could well bring down the Chinese Communist Party. And if, here's my Christmas wish. Give me an end to the Chinese Communist Party, because it is pure evil, and it's only gotten more evil under Xi Jinping. And anybody who tells you otherwise, you need to call them out, because they are contributing to the delinquency of your country. So I'll leave you with that thought. For the Omnist Hour, like, share, subscribe, interact with me, tell me I'm full of shit, argue with me. I love arguing. I love having a good discussion. I don't like sitting around calling names and throwing ad hominem attacks at each other. I like evidence-based discussions. And I'm more than happy to share my evidence, my experience in those discussions, and integrate the experience of others. That's what omnism is all about. This is what makes it different from other religions, from other ideologies, from other philosophies. It's an integrative one. If I find new knowledge that doesn't fit with the knowledge I've acquired through my experience, my research, I amend my teaching to accommodate that. If you can convince me anything I'm saying on my channel is wrong, I will absolutely retract it and say, I'm sorry, I was full of shit. Prove it. Don't just throw darts at me. You can throw darts at me. I mean, I don't really care as long as you're not here physically in the same room as me. You can throw all the darts you want. I'm used to getting slings and arrows of outrageous bullshit on social media, and I'm pretty well immune to it. But I really would like you to think about and ask yourself if it could be true, and what would be the implications for how I make my decisions in life, in this life, and how I might be making decisions that lead me towards what I've told you is going to be a next life. Many lives of reincarnation bounded by karma. At any rate, for the Omnist Hour, this is Rob Tromp.